Good morning, everyone. Good morning, or good afternoon. Please excuse me. Good afternoon. Welcome to all those of you who are here in the audience here, and welcome to those folks who are available online. My name is John Mayo. I'm a professor of economics, business, and public policy in the McDonough School of Business at Georgetown University. I am also the executive director of the Georgetown Center for Business and Public Policy, which is our host organization for today. And finally, I am going to serve as the moderator for our event, our Georgetown on the Hill event, which is entitled Entrepreneurship, Innovation and Mergers, Can Antitrust Thread the Needle? And just to tell you where we're headed, I want to first offer just a very few framing remarks for today. Secondly, I want to introduce our distinguished panel. And then finally, I want to give you a little bit of a run of show so that you know everyone here knows where we're headed. For the past century, economists have developed theories and amassed empirical evidence on the effects of mergers, whether they are competitive horizontal mergers involving competitors or vertical mergers involving firms that are up and down the value chain. And principally, notably, the focus by economists has been primarily, not exclusively, but primarily on pricing effects. What is the effect on price of a given merger? For about as long, for a century or so, enforcers have looked at mergers and occasionally have challenged those mergers, most often horizontal mergers, but occasionally vertical mergers, under the general proposition that those particular mergers are harmful to competition because they have price elevating effects. Now, less commonly analyzed and less well established in the economics and law in this space has been the question of how merger policy and how merger enforcement has affected the entrepreneurial ecosystem, which serves as, let's call it, the lifeblood of new firms and of innovation in this country. Now, against this backdrop of having a pretty well-established body of economics and law on pricing effects, and not so much or far less evidence in the entrepreneurial ecosystem space, we have had a discussion arise in this country recently about the prospect that large firms, large incumbent firms, may purchase young entrepreneurial firms for the purpose of eliminating competition, of killing competition, as it were. And of course, alternatively, it may be that those mergers, those sorts of mergers, may serve to expand output, to lower price, and to alter, maybe in a positive way, the output of new services, new products, and most importantly, innovation. And so today, we have a wonderful panel that is, I think, eminently qualified, maybe uniquely qualified, to lead us in a discussion of this sort of merger and the type of issues that emerge in this space. We have, the panel is going to consist of two economists, Mark Ivaldi and Ginger Chen, who are leading economists doing cutting-edge work on serial acquisitions and on what has come to be known as killer acquisitions, and two practitioners, Doug Levin and Bobby Franklin. Let me give them a more proper introduction here. Ginger, and I'll begin with Ginger, who's the second person on my left, is the Neil Moskowitz Professor of Economics at the University of Maryland, College Park. Ginger is a prominent economist in the field of industrial organization, which is the field of economics that focuses on antitrust and regulation. Her work has been published in leading economics journals, leading marketing journals, leading management journals. She has, at last count, about 10,000 citations to her work in the economics literature, so she garners a lot of respect among her colleagues in the economics field. Ginger has previously served as the director of the Bureau of Economics at the Federal Trade Commission, has been an Amazon scholar, has served as the principal economist for Amazon.inc, or com, sorry about that, and received her PhD in economics in the year 2000. Mark Ivaldi is a professor of economics at the Toulouse School of Economics. He holds a number of appointments, including as a research fellow at the Center for Economic Policy. Mark has done research in a variety of areas, but is a leading scholar in the field of competition in network industries, and has served as an advisor to both companies and to enforcers, including the European Commission in the antitrust space. So we're delighted to have Mark here today. Mark received his PhD from the University of Pennsylvania, and also a PhD in economics from the Université des Sciences Sociales, hope I didn't butcher that, of Toulouse. The audio can correct me on that. I love AI. Next, let me introduce Doug Levin. Doug is, in short, a prominent serial entrepreneur, having founded or co-founded 5 different companies. He's also a technologist, and he is the executive fellow at the Harvard Business School, where he teaches a popular course on the Startup Academy. I want to take this course. He also has taught a range of entrepreneurship and startup finance courses at MIT. He presently serves on a number of boards of directors. And he's the author of a popular Substack blog entitled Lessons from a Startup Life. Last but certainly not least, Bobby Franklin is joining us today. Bobby is the CEO of the National Capital Venture Association, where Bobby has led that organization since 2013. Over that time, the National Capital Venture Association has become, let's say, the preeminent voice looking at, investigating, and championing the cause of startup organizations across the United States. Before serving in his current capacity, Bobby was at the at CTIA, the Wireless Association, and prior to that was at a telecommunications company, Alltel, headquartered in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I have to note that Bobby was also began his career working for one of my political heroes in the political realm, David Pryor, the senator from the great state of Arkansas. So it is just a treat to have them all here today. Now, in terms of the run of show, let me tell you, we're going to have 40, 45 minutes of discussion among the panel. But one of the great things about being in Washington is that we have expertise not only on the dais, but also in the audience. And I'm looking around and seeing that some of that expertise. I want you to get your questions ready. The only thing that I would ask is that today's event is being recorded and live broadcast. So please do wait for a microphone so that we can record your voice and have it be part of the lasting memory of this event. Please identify yourself and your organization. Will be helpful for the panelists. After we have our discussion, we're going to then, and a Q&A session, we're then going to conclude the in-person part of this, or the online part of this. Goodbye to everybody out there that's online. You're not going to get to enjoy a wonderful lunch. Some of you have already dipped into the lunch. I hope you're enjoying it. But for those of you who haven't eaten before the end of the event, there should be food back there for you. And the idea is to allow for you to interact in an informal context with the panelists and to network among yourselves. So we think that that's going to be a terrific way to go. So without further ado, let me turn to maybe Ginger first. And what I want to ask you, Ginger, is that you've done a lot of work on competition, on information asymmetries on, you've served at an enforcement agency. But most notably for our purposes, what I want to do is direct your attention and our attention to your more recent work on serial acquisitions. If you could just give us a bit of the lay of the land of serial acquisitions, which is something that's very much in the public discussion, but not necessarily with a lot of necessary research and understanding what's really going on. So could you please tell us about your research?
Yes, John, thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to summarize our recent working paper titled Serial Acquisitions in Tech. This work is joined with Professor Mario Lassasi at Boston University, Professor Liad Wegman at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and Mr. Yunfei Wang, who is a PhD candidate at the University of Maryland Business School. So full paper is available as a working paper at mbr.org, so you're welcome to check out the whole paper. Let me start with the definition of serial acquisitions. We refer to serial acquisition as sequence of transactions by the same acquirer in the same or adjacent market. The primary antitrust concern about serial acquisition is that a large incumbent may quietly acquire a number of small competitors under the radar, but cumulatively, those deals together may exceed the HSR's threshold for merger review. This way, the serial acquisition may allow the incumbent to gain significant market power and harm market competition and maybe harm market innovation as well, all without any ex ante merger reviews under the current case-by-case regime of antitrust enforcement. So I think the theory is pretty straightforward, except that it's difficult to define the market, especially in the tech sector where technology develops very fast, market boundary is very fluid, and there are considerable dynamics in entries and exit. So our empirical solution to this is using S&P Global Market Intelligence, which is a large and probably the largest database of M&A deals in the tech sector to our best knowledge. And more importantly, they classify the acquirers and targets according to a tree structure taxonomy. So that means they define, okay, which category you belong to in the level 1, and within level 1, which subcategory you belong to in level 2, and so forth. So just to give you some example, I know FTC has raised complaint against Facebook acquisition of Instagram and WhatsApp, argue that might be a series of acquisitions that potentially harmed the market competition. In the S&P data, Instagram is classified as mobility in level 1 and application in level 2, while WhatsApp is classified as mobility as well in level 1, but messaging in level 2. So if you define the market as level 1 category, they would be a series of acquisition. If you define the market narrowly as level 1 plus level 2, they're not a series of acquisitions. Okay. Another example, I know in the Google ad tech case, Google has been accused to have a series of potentially anti-competitive acquisition of DoubleClick and AdMeld, and both of them are actually classified in the same level 1 and the level 2 according to the S&P taxonomy, so that will be a series of acquisition. Our data is looking at from 2010 to 2023. Because if we looked at the narrow definition, Instagram and WhatsApp would not belong to the same level 2. They would not be counted as a series. However, WhatsApp is still a series in our narrow definition because Facebook has acquired Beluga before then. So you can see that the definition of serial acquisition actually depends on how you define the market and what time you're looking at and so forth. Okay, so in the paper we have presented statistics under both the narrow definition and the wide definition, but the conclusion is pretty similar. Okay, so I would say we have probably 4 to 5 findings. One is that we find about 1/4 to 1/3 of all the M&A deals recorded by S&P actually are serial acquisitions. I don't know what's your prior actually higher than my prior, so I'm a little surprised. Second, we actually find follow-on deals in the same series tend to be larger and older than the initial target. So in other words, the follow-on deals actually more likely to be under the rate, to be sort of looked at by the antitrust agencies because they're more likely to exceed HSR's threshold. That's also a little surprising to me. And the third surprise to us is that we actually find more than 50% of those serial deals are actually acquired by publicly listed companies who are not private equities. Maybe the popular story you have heard are, okay, those PE firms have been very aggressively acquiring the small targets, and their roll-up strategy would allow them to accumulate certain market powers. We were very surprised to find that actually more than half of the data in our serial acquisitions are actually completed by public firms. So that's number 3. If you look at the average, the length of the series, which is like number of follow-on deals after the initial deal, if it's a series, is about 2. Okay, and if an acquirer engage in a serial acquisition, they engage about just 1.4 series. So in other words, a typical serial acquisition is not kind of the big names in our mind. However, the big names indeed appear very different from the average. So for example, Google/Alphabet, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, and Apple, those are the GAFAM firms. Their average is about 16 series, okay, as compared to the average of 1.4 of other serial acquisition acquirers. So they tend to have way more number of series of serial acquisitions. On the other hand, if you look at the length of each series they engage in, it's 3 rather than 2. So they also engage in slightly longer series as compared to the average. I should say that GAFAM are not the only outliers. We also see other tech giants like IBM or Cisco engage in many serial acquisitions. I believe IBM is about 24 and Cisco is about 17. So it's a long tail with quite interesting big tech operation in the serial acquisitions. So back to my original question, like how concerned should we be in the antitrust concerns? So in the paper, we're actually going through a cumulative approach rather than a case-by-case approach. We're saying, what if we look at the series in a cumulative way? To what extent that's going to change the timing and the case in which the antitrust agencies will start look at the series? The answer is that it's only moderately make the timing earlier or a few deals earlier, but for some outliers that could be several years earlier or several deals earlier, okay? For the GAFAM and other top 1% publicly tech acquirers, because they have a larger number of series, the main change in the cumulative approach is actually heightened attention on their non-reported deals with missing transaction values. So this is not necessarily saying that going the cumulative approach will make the agencies look at the reported deals or the deals with transaction size values earlier, but it will allow them to look at the presumably smaller deals, but do not report transaction value at all earlier, okay? And we argue that this actually could be automated if the agencies look at the same data as we're using, they set up the algorithm. It could be an alert system, right? That they can track who is who doing which acquisitions, whether those acquisitions form a series, and they can adjust the parameter, say, if the transaction value is missing, to what extent we think that's average below HSR threshold transaction size, and then use that parameter. The system can give them some alert, okay? And that actually could be very complementary to the current case-by-case approach. So that's kind of the basic statistical exercise we have done. I should give caveats that this is a kind of a screening exercise. We actually are silent, not speaking to whether those deals are pro-competitive or anti-competitive. Okay, we're just saying that there could be a better way to look at those deals and accounting for the serialness of a sequence. Okay, we're also not taking a position, okay, whether different firms in the same category are substitutes or complements, and we're not speaking to the future utilization, other potential consequences from those serial acquisitions. That will be future work.
Ginger, thank you very much. It provoked several questions, but let me just focus on one that's on the minds of people in Washington, I think, and that is going, let's say, beyond your own research to the more general literature. What do we know about the impact of these sorts of mergers on innovation and economic welfare?
Oh, that's a very good and also very hard question. I actually have another paper written for the Handbook of Digital Platforms titled "The Role of Digital Platforms in Shaping Tech Venture Innovations." And in that paper, we review the literature and we find that platforms and the startup ventures tend to interact in many dimensions. That could be on the capital dimension, could be on the labor dimension, could be on the innovation, as well as in the product market. So just in a nutshell, we see the literature on one hand, those large digital platforms actually play a role, enable startups to begin to success and even to exit of their entrepreneurship. So that sounds a good part. Of course, there are also literature, at least in theory, trying to say there could be risks. That's those large platforms through acquisition or through other transaction or some strategy against the startup competitors that could be potentially harming competition. So the literature basically saying that both sides could be possible, and we need to be careful in judging which way it goes in reality.
Okay. All right. Doug, let me turn to you. Ginger has done a lot of work on serial acquisitions. You're a serial entrepreneur. That makes you, I guess, a data point in Ginger's research. But you're far more than that as an entrepreneur. Could you, from the perspective not of having done the economic research here, but having lived the life of an entrepreneur, talk a bit about what's in the minds of entrepreneurs as they form companies, as they grow companies, and since we're here in Washington, what, if anything, is on entrepreneurs' minds by way of policy constraints and policy observations, especially maybe in the antitrust arena these days?
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me. And I have to say that I know very few entrepreneurs who think about antitrust. The entrepreneurial...
And I know very few economists who think about entrepreneurs.
Good point. Very good point. So when entrepreneurs form ventures, they are thinking about how to combine technologies and solving a problem. The problem is centralmost. And today it's easier than ever to basically deploy a whole bunch of solutions to solve those problems. Over a period of time, the entrepreneur may be successful in forming a team and then subsequently forming a company and raising money and doing all the things that are necessary to build up the company. But over a period of time also, there begins to be friction with states and the federal government. The first friction I received was when I was building my last company was a $600 tax bill from the state of Delaware, and I wasn't even selling product. So these kind of things are part of the overall mix of things that entrepreneurs simply have to deal with in order to grow big. What's really important to understand, though, when we rise it above the entrepreneurial level, is that what comes out of Washington is very impactful. In the prior administration, the leader of the FTC did a really harmful job on the entrepreneurial ecosystem by instituting a chill on not just small M&A, but also large M&A. Now, in some cases, the large M&A were just blatant cases of that could be adjudicated in the court system. But the chill that was extended to small and medium-sized ventures is basically very destructive, and the positive results of creating that chill are negligible. It's really, it was, in my opinion, an effort to try to slow down the entire technology ecosystem and basically attack technology. Now, part of the reason why that attack occurred was there were a number of instances, really bad instances of social media like Facebook, et cetera, propagating violent acts. But this is not the way to address social media, nor is it a way to address very large companies that are in antitrust situations. The future, now that being the case, there's a second thing I'd like to talk about. We're in a race with China right now. And China in some ways is ahead of the United States in the AI space. And in order to do that, there has, in China's case, there is billions of dollars that go into startups. In order for us to compete, there's not money coming out of the government as we've seen recently with the large cutbacks. There's money coming out of the venture capital system as well as the PE system. They have been the yeomen, they've been the leaders in funding companies that then ultimately become part of the larger ecosystem and enable us to compete. In AI, we will lose that competition if this chill is permitted to continue. M&A results in better companies. In some cases, there are misses. There's certainly lots of misses. But basically, small M&A, medium-sized M&A, and large M&A result in companies that evolve from technology to labor and talent especially in the AI age, as well as capital and technology and other factors. These factors are necessary for companies to evolve. And one of the things which is fascinating to me is when government just doesn't understand the technology and does things which are really harmful to either individual technology companies or the technology ecosystem. So I think one of the policy prescriptions that I want to work on in the coming months is to just get government better educated about AI, technology like cybersecurity, and the intersection of those technologies like AI and cybersecurity.
Again, provokes many questions, but let me just, to keep us moving forward, Mark, let me turn to you if I could. There is a term of art in economics. The term is killer acquisitions that arose in the year 2021 with the publication of a prominent article. The notion of killer acquisitions is that a large incumbent firm buys a small entrepreneurial company with the express purpose of degrading or killing or terminating the entrepreneurial activities and product space for the small entrepreneurial company. I know you've done a recent piece of research in the Antitrust Law Journal that both surveys the empirical work and then it goes beyond that empirical work that exists to do your own research. If I understand correctly, what you conclude in the survey of the existing literature is that the empirical evidence, well, the theoretical possibility of killer acquisitions is essentially unassailable, but that the empirical research is rather thin in this space, supporting the prevalence of killer acquisitions. But then you go on to do your own research in this space. And what I wanted to do is to ask you if you could talk about your own research in this space. What did you conclude, bottom line, what did you conclude, and then maybe how you got there to that conclusion?
Thank you, John, to inviting me and to speak on this panel. It's a very important issue. It seems to be an important issue in this country. It's even more an important issue in the EU right now. The productivity gap between the US and the EU has increased a lot since the last 15 years, and the debate is really on how we are going to adapt our competition policy and our competition law and even law in fact boost innovation in Europe. So killer acquisition, you already gave the definition, is when large firms they acquire firms that could be competitor in the future to discontinue them. Okay, so that is opening the box of dynamic competition, because today these large firms have market power, and by buying the firm, they remove the source of competition in the future. So of course it's an important debate, and what Ginger has shown about research is part of this analysis. There is a growing debate. There is a growing literature. So when we started to do what we have done, the literature was small, but more and more people, researcher colleagues are working on that. Maybe we will discuss the different aspects that from the different analyses. It is clear that what is happening in the pharmaceutical industry, that was the first paper on killer acquisition was for pharmaceutical. And what we can say that what we observe in the pharmaceutical sector is different from what we see on digital. Okay, not that anyway. Killer acquisition in pharmaceutical industry was about the proportion was about 5-7%, which is basically the same percent. It's interesting to see. It is the same percent of the number of merger cases that are blocked, prohibited in the US. So it's interesting. But coming back to my paper, so we wanted to look at this question. And since we are on killer acquisition, we are interested by the kill. And if you are interested by the kill, you have to look at what is going to happen to the products of the target. There are at least two questions. Are the products of the target abandoned by the acquirer, or they are scaled in some way or another by the acquirer? The problem with that, and it is central for the debate on the competition issue. It's well, innovation is already complex to analyze, to evaluate. When there is a merger and you say that there will be innovation because of this merger, is complicated to prove and to show. Okay, so but in this case, when you have a kill, there is a problem of observability, simple observability, because when the merger has been realized, you don't know what is going to happen for the product of the target. It is involved in it, and so you see that. How can we look at data, maybe data from the different type of statistical institute? It's difficult to observe that. And the second problem is that there is an inference problem. It is not because, suppose that we will observe that all cases of this type of merger have ended in the fact that the product have disappeared. you cannot conclude directly that there is a lessening of competition. There are some theoretical paper trying to prove that, but there is no conclusion on that. There is only conjecture. So it's for this reason to avoid, and I think it's a way that will be useful for in a practical way to evaluate this merger. One way is, of course, it could be complicated, is to look at what the competitors are saying about the merger. Okay, how they feel about the merger that has been realized. And so we did, the idea was to do free tests based on what the competitors are saying. That is to say, is there a disappearance of the target product? Is there a weakening of competition? That is to say, because of the increase of market power, they cannot compete more. And is there any lack of entry or lack of innovation? That is to say, did you see that there was no other type of innovation? So what we did was to look at 12 cases, merger cases, investigated and approved by the European Commission, because it was important, by the way, we could have all the information on the merger in the decision of the Commission. 12 mergers that involve GAFAMs or large firms. So in the 12 cases that we have looked, so it's case studies that we have done, you have a merger like Google Fitbit, you have Facebook WhatsApp, but also Oracle and Microsoft. And then what we look, so we look data from Standard & Poor's, different type of data collected, and also information from the book of the different competitors, from what they have done, and we look at what this data could, how this data could help us to answer the three questions that I have just asked, and we found no evidence of disappearance, no evidence that there was lack of competition, and the fact that there is no information. So from the policy perspective of these results, the first one is finally the European Commission seems to work quite well. Should we change the policy, since finally they have been able to do a good job? But anyway, the problem is that we have looked only at the merger that have passed the threshold. Okay, and so the question is to know what will be the question of how we will what will happen if we look to the merger under the threshold from this perspective. But the problem will be that in this case it will be useful to prove that the firms that will that are involved in the transaction, the firms with limited revenue, will be more susceptible to do a kill than the one that that were involved in the mergers that we have seen. So I'm just stopping at this point, but there are many other elements that are being observed on the fact that at least in the digital situation, it is difficult to see that we have killer acquisition. Okay, but it is interesting to look at the result, and I think indeed the question of what Ginger has worked on, the question of serial acquisition is an important aspect, and the fact to see, because it's clearly a strategy of this firm to acquire capability. Okay, this type of merger are on capability. Okay, so it is another thing of looking only to market power. It is also to construct an investment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to turn to Bobby, but before we do, just any comments from any of the panelists on this notion of killer acquisitions? We have a couple different perspectives here. Doug?
I'll just add one quick comment that there's a second definition for a killer acquisition, and that is it's accretive in 1 quarter.
Yes. Good.
Wonderful. All right. Bobby, let me turn to you. We know that this event is centered around a set of concerns that have been raised principally by policymakers, but also by economists and lawyers, that larger firms may buy smaller firms for the express purposes of eliminating competition. Those concerns probably reached a crescendo in the last administration. But as we roll forward into the current administration, it seems, and it may just be me, but I think there are other people that are not observing a reversal of that thinking. And I'm just wondering, from the perspective of a venture capitalist in the venture capital community, how you see that policy environment affecting your set of folks that are in your space.
Well, it's a great question, and the simple answer, and it's sort of the answer to the title of this panel, which is Entrepreneurship, Innovation, and Mergers, Can Antitrust Thread the Needle? Well, they don't seem to have done it yet, is my answer to the question. And the reason I say that is because, yes, the crescendo happened in the last administration, but even in the current leadership, and they're still trying to staff up there, a lot of the signaling doesn't seem a whole lot different. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a reflection of, frankly, where we are in the country with regard to our politics. When the election happened, I said to our board, we had a board meeting a few weeks after, I said, what you have historically thought about from the Republican Party and what you have historically thought about from the Democratic Party, you can throw out the window. We don't have those anymore. I argue we have a Trump, MAGA, populist party that's in charge. And I argue that we have an opposition party that doesn't seem to have a leader, doesn't seem to have a message, but knows that it's against a lot of the other things. And when you look at the rise of populism and you look at the rise of progressivism, if that's a word, it's where the right and the left meet around the back. And I think it manifests itself on this issue, and we are deeply concerned. I think that in listening to the professors talk about the research and observing regulators when they look at mergers and acquisitions, it appears that we're always focused on the acquiring company. And it doesn't appear like any policymaker is focused on the companies or the industry or the entrepreneurial ecosystem of those companies that are being acquired. And it's so important. And as a result of this crescendo that we had in the last administration, we see now very low fundraising numbers in venture capital. Well, that's bad for entrepreneurs. There's not as much money going into venture funds to support entrepreneurs than there were years ago. and it's all connected. It's the flywheel of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So you obviously make investments, you sit with these companies. One study said that over a 10-year period, all venture investments, 75% failed, went to zero. Of the 25% that didn't go to zero, 2% stayed private on their own, 5% went public, and 18% had a merger and acquisition outcome. And that's what's necessary for this ecosystem to thrive and continue. You have to have liquidations, you have to have distributions back to the limited partners so that when you as a general partner and a venture capitalist go back to raise your next fund, they're willing to provide because you have given distributions. Now you look at the average time that a company stays in the venture ecosystem, it's 8 or 9 years. It continues to sort of grow. And that's extraordinarily difficult for us to keep the pace of innovation that we need as a country. The venture ecosystem is, if you think about it, it's really the outsourced R&D arm of almost every industry. Once upon a time, there were Bell Labs and there was, big R&D sections of Fortune 500 companies. That doesn't happen as much anymore. 62 or 63% of all new drugs that are approved by the FDA every year came from a small venture-backed company. And here's a great example when you think about new drugs and medicines. A small venture-backed company, it's impossible once that patent starts for you to be able to distribute the life-saving medicine to all the people that need it. You don't have that machine built. So in that's a great example of how it's absolutely crucial for them to be bought by a bigger company so that that company can market it and distribute it and get it out to the masses who need it because they have this window. And you've got to have that return or else there won't be investment in life-saving drugs. So I sort of look at all of this from the position of some policymakers should, in my opinion, be thinking about the impact when you chill mergers and acquisitions, what that has on the entire entrepreneurial ecosystem and its ability to continue to raise capital so new entrepreneurs can move forward.
Let me just sit on that just for a second, and using my vernacular, not yours. Economists think about entry and exit of firms, and we mainly focus on the entry process. We spend a lot of time on the entry process, but what you were raising, and I think what Doug, you implicitly raised, you maybe explicitly, Bobby, is the need to focus on the exit process. And the question that I would have is, how might policy that restricts the exit process for young entrepreneurial firms affect the entry process?
Right.
Open to anybody, but you guys especially.
Well, as a researcher, I cannot have the same position as Bobby. You have a position. Our position is to try to prove what you are saying, okay, or to dismiss what you are, okay. So, but precisely that's the problem here. The problem is that before merger, it was a question of trying to evaluate what will be the impact on price. Mm-hmm. Okay. Here is a problem of what will be the impact of innovation. We don't know the innovation, we don't know the result of the innovation, and we look at that. Okay. So we can apply the same type of analysis. Okay. You know that one of the way to evaluate merger is to compute the diversion ratio. That is to say, the substitution effect, how the substitution effect between the two products that are now within the same firm when there is a merger, how this substitution is strong enough to allow the manager to increase the price after merger. Here, we could think about an innovation diversion ratio. How a change in innovation in one firm will affect innovation in other firms. So that's very complicated, okay? And precisely and honestly, but we are really humble on that, is indeed we are seeing that we need to introduce in our research things that are much more complicated. I was speaking about capability. The problem, clearly, what we observe is behind this merger is how to get human capital to resources. It's not necessarily to buy a patent. It's really to build that. And my experience, I was very impressed by that when I visited for 3 days the building of Spotify in New York. And it's strange because it's a firm, but there are many firms inside. Competing and many, in fact, it's startups that have been bought, and all the team is there, okay? And they keep working, and there is an ecosystem, as we say now, that creates the value and converging to make a business model that seems to work.
If I can...
Please, Ginger.
Yeah, I want to answer your question by saying that there's a growing literature called entry for buyout. And this may be consistent with what Bobby is saying, that's the entrepreneurs, they're probably not going to be in that business forever. At some point, they expect returns. And given that being acquired is the most common channel to successfully exit entrepreneurship of that particular firm, then making that channel narrower or more difficult would discourage entry. So I think that's a very logical argument. I also want to point out the other side of the coin. There's some literature, theoretical literature, showing that because of entry for buyout incentive, as I described, and because the potential acquirers, assuming they're big incumbents, may fight really hard with a startup. If the startup compete head-to-head with the incumbent, the entry for buyout incentive may motivate the startup to conduct innovative activity in complementary products to the incumbent rather than in head-to-head competition. So this is a theory, and that could have a potential to kind of reshape the competition in the future.
There's an old joke in economics about Harry Truman asking for a two-handed or a one-handed economist, because economists always speak about on the one hand and on the other. We clearly have two-handed economists here tonight or this afternoon. Let me, if I could, there's so many questions that we'd ask, but we do want to turn to some Q&As. But let's just wrap this up, if I could, by bringing this full circle. And Doug, turn back to you. If again, from the perspective of someone who studies the entrepreneurial ecospace, can you give us just a lay of the land of what's going on with M&A activity today as we sit here in 2025? I know you wrote a blog recently, and it was just you do this regularly. I encourage all of you to read his blog. In it, you spoke about how the nature, not only the level of activity, but you spoke about how, quote, the success now of M&A now hinges less on scale and more on strong integration and clear strategic focus. If you could just bring us, sort of ground us on the back end the way Ginger did on the front end, that would be great.
Well, for many years, M&A was driven by consolidation. And the idea would be, there are blocks out there, and you consolidate them, and then you integrate all these things, and hopefully it becomes accretive. But recently, with the advent of AI and AI-driven companies and AI-centric companies, it's been very important to get the technology fit right. And that's one of the reasons why I think the policy prescriptions going forward have to be different. They have to just say, below $1 billion, for example, the antitrust authorities are just simply not going to look at it, and that there are tax incentives for that below the $1 billion mark, or whatever the number is. But the important point is that what Bobby said about the entrepreneurial ecosystem, creating the next big set of companies and all the employment that's attendant to that. And I personally started my biggest company with my dog Trent, who was dedicated to the future of the company, and we ended up 15 years later with 553 employees. You multiply that, and you see what we do here in the United States. We build big companies, yeah, but we also employ a lot of people. And granted, there's been recent shifts in employment and unemployment as a result of AI, but that's going to change over time. AI has changed the entire picture, and we've got to be much more attentive to the technology and how it fits together. The consolidation model's gone. It's more of a fit and scale kind of issue. Just to give you an example, there's a company that I know of in the Valley that basically, within 6 months of its creation, was generating $10 million of ARR, or annual recurring revenue. They bought, along the way, 3 or 4 companies that were acqui-hires. Well, they should not have to ask anybody for the acqui-hire signal to be green. They shouldn't hear about it in the press as a negative. They should see it as a positive, because these independent companies enrolling up into another company will make this kind of venture more successful and make the country more competitive and employ more people eventually.
Okay, I personally have so many questions. I think we've just begun the conversation, not ended it, but I want to be respectful to the people in the audience. Let me ask if there are questions, if you could raise your hand, and please do wait for a microphone to come to you before you ask the question, and please identify yourself. Any questions? Let's go with Ayan. You should identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Ayan. I'm a sophomore in the Georgetown University Business and Global Affairs program, and my question is about the new administration's enforcement of law as it relates to merger and acquisitions. Obviously, there's a lot of concern going around that the administration, as it enforces laws today, might be more favorable towards its quote-unquote friends than it is towards its enemies. Do we see that with how it's potentially enforcing merger and acquisition law? And for the two economists out there, is there research on the causes and effects of lobbying and administration for favors like that?
Great question.
It is a great question. I think that I haven't seen enough yet to sort of draw some conclusion. I mean, you can obviously have opinions about what the current administration is doing on a whole host of things. I'm not sure there's been enough activity yet to see if that, in fact, is the case. I guess the two things that I sort of look to are, one, after the current chair of the FTC was appointed, he made a point to basically say the changes in the DOJ and in the FTC merger guidelines that were accomplished in the previous administration are here to stay for some period of time. So that sent a signal to many of us that, okay, things aren't different. As we've seen in other parts, I'll use the Securities and Exchange Commission as an example. We had great difficulty with the chair of the SEC in the last administration. In fact, we went to court and sued and won. And there were a number of rulemakings. And certainly with the new chair of the SEC, you've seen a 180 and you've seen a very different tone. Because of that data point, as well as some others that we've seen, the jury's still out. I am not sure that we have seen a significant difference. And like I said, on the other, you have to wait and see.
Other questions?
If I can.
Oh, yes, please. And then let's turn to Mark.
If I can give a follow-up answer to your question, I know it's tempting to think about different administration as who is more friendly to the business and who is enemy to the business. But I want to second Doug's point that regardless what's the philosophy on this pro versus against the business, I feel like what's lacking in the government agency is they really understand the market. They tore up in their technology and usage. I feel like the agency are ages behind the market. They don't know what's going on. The market has been featured by AI, by algorithm, by many, many other things that goes very far, like 1,000 miles a day. But the agencies are still following very old playbook, reading the legal documents by printing them out and so forth. I just feel like that technology gap has to be filled regardless of the philosophy by the administration.
Just reinforcing what you just said. I think about the Google case, and it was brought around 10 or 15 years too late. That Eric Holder's DOJ, just to pick on one guy, another guy, I guess, he just didn't get it. They didn't get it. They should have, from 2010 through 2015, that's when they should have gone after Google, not when when their market share was dropping. Google's market share is now dropping even more with Perplexity and other Gen AIs. Mm-hmm. So this understanding of the market is it's not like a entrepreneurial rant. It's truly not that. This is a problem. The antitrust and the lawyers go to law school, and that's great, and they become professionalized. But they've got to go to business school, and they've got to learn about technology, because that's really what we need in the government to improve this. And one other point, separate from that, this government's got to improve the time to market for IPOs, which is a related matter. We will have a much healthier ecosystem if we had more IPOs.
Okay, next question.
Sure. Hi, Mark Whitener from the Georgetown McDonough School. Great discussion. Thank you all for being here. So trying to think about how you would help antitrust enforcers do their jobs, and some of you have done the job. And I'm thinking about horizontal merger analysis, which is kind of inherently predictive, usually, which makes it challenging. And then you add the layer that we may not even know what the target's going to do. It's a nascent competitor, it may be significant, it may not. So a sort of second level of speculation. How should antitrust enforcers think about this? They could throw up their hands and say, well, it's too predictive, too speculative, we just can't make a call, so we're going to let the deal go. And maybe that should be the default. If not, what sources of information or evidence should they rely on? And I'm thinking particularly about the old bugaboo of internal documents, which often can be interesting, maybe informative, maybe misleading. But in this case, wouldn't it make sense for the regulators, at least in the first instance, to look pretty closely at what the acquiring firm is saying about the target, what its prospects are, and while motivation usually seems like it should be largely irrelevant, maybe here we want to know, is the primary motivation to take this technology and use it and make it an accretive acquisition, or is it perhaps more in the thinking of the deal planners on the buy side about a defensive sort of motivation?
Well, I think that we are working on that. I mean, the practical analysis of this type of merger, we are. I mean, all this research, all this debate, are to try to change the policy to be able to really investigate this case in the right way, as taking into account what Doug and Bobby have said in the practical way. I don't think that we have arrived at something clear. There are some facts that we observe. right now in the EU, there is a big project on how to set up a way to measure the effect of dynamic mergers. So it is clear. Now there are some ways. Okay, we know it's not always good. For example, we know the number of we know some things on patents, so we can do some analysis of patents. It's not only a good solution. Patent is not necessarily the best way to measure innovation. Okay, but we can do we can in a specific case look at. There is enough information. I mean, at the time of artificial intelligence, they should be able to locate the merger in the ecosystem described by different type of measure, like the number of patents, the type of patents, things like that. I don't think we can only count on what the firms are saying. It's important. Of course, it's important. But you know, I've been involved in merger cases where the question of innovation was centered, in particular the fact that it could be possible to produce plastic bottles that could contain milk. And the firm were saying, we are going to do it and we are going to sell it because people prefer to have a plastic bottle because it's lighter to carry. But it never happened. The reason, it's a technical problem. If you use a plastic bottle to put the milk, with the light of the sun, the milk is deteriorating very quickly. And so, as you can see, still milk is in carton box or in opaque
Carton?
plastic which is not transparent. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I mean it's important. I mean to take into account what they are saying, but we need to have a more objective reason to evaluate a merger. And personally, I don't believe in threshold. Okay, that's it seems to me that we can put it 1 billion. We can put it at this level of HHI, whatever. That's, from my point of view of researchers, not the good way. So the good way is to try to set up, and I believe that we can do it. We need to make a lot of investment on that. However, I totally agree with Doug. It seems that the competition authority are trying to catch up after the business and are never arriving to be on time.
If I can answer your question, I can think of 3 things. If I have to write down a very short list for potential advice to antitrust agencies, I think number 1, we have to change the mentality from price to non-price competition, especially in the tech sector. A lot of price are 0, at least consumer-facing price are 0. So just focus on price will be misleading. Entries, patents, different ideas, new products, and so forth. All these are dimensions of non-price competition. I think the mentality has to shift towards non-price competition. And the second, I feel like the agencies can can use the public information in a much better way. I know in the traditional playbook, they were saying, okay, we need to look into an industry, let's issue a 6B study, let's find a list of 9 firms that we can send subpoena to and impose the burden of collecting confidential information from them, and hopefully that would help us to understand the industry. Well, in fact, a lot of public data are available there, right? Like the SEC filings that Mark has used in his study, the venture capital investment part of that has been very public, and there are multiple data sets on that, and IPOs and other things. There are a lot of public information. Again, back to my point of technology enhancement. There should be a better way, more efficiently use those public information. You may say, okay, the agencies don't have resources, they cannot be definitely compared to Google and other big techs in terms of resources, but I think a lot of academics or even think tanks and other researchers or even association people will be willing to help if they can carve out their agenda, say, here are the list of questions we really want to answer to. And then you encourage people to contribute to that. I think that's a much faster way to understand the market and also not imposing too much burden on just a small number of firms, which not going to give you a representative view of the industry anyway.
I have a proposition. We are looking with Ginger, she doesn't say that, but we are looking between $1-2 million dollars or euros to do this type of research.
I think Ginger just got a contract. We're out of time. I wish we were, but we are. We need to end the formal part of this. Please, if you haven't had food, make yourself welcome. Please feel free to interact with the panelists for a few minutes afterwards. And finally, but most importantly, please help me thank the panelists.
Thank you.